It's not just about talking to executives. It's about talking to those people on the front line. Stop catching the problem. Start coaching to fix the problem. I am tired of seeing audit plans with things that have already happened.
Welcome, everybody. This is Tuesday Morning Grind, episode number 59. And today we have a great topic where we're going to talk about how internal audit, quality auditing really overlaps with security. And that might not sound intuitive to some of you guys, but in the world of security, you do a lot of security assessments. And a lot of what we're going to talk about with our guest today will be related to how to make those assessments higher quality and how to think about risk and present findings and things like that. So a great conversation. We have Amanda Jo Irwin with us today. She is a trainer on total quality auditing and how to do quality audits. Does a lot of stuff where if you need CPE or you want training, you want education around this, she does a lot of that. Also, author of the book Total Quality Auditing, adjunct professor at University of Northern Colorado, and other places. I think MSU Denver I saw as well. So obviously in the classroom a lot, educating a whole lot. So thank you so much, Jo, for being with us.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
So maybe to kick it off, how did you get into internal auditing, total quality auditing, and how did you develop a passion for such a thing? Because I think most folks, when they think about auditing, it's not super exciting. It doesn't seem like it. I'm excited about it because I started my career that way as well. But how did you get into it, and how did you kind of find this niche?
Yeah. So, like a lot of us, I went to school for accounting. So, started down that path. I remember when I was going for my master's, they said, hey, you have to pick a track. You have to pick audit or tax. Well, tax was like not my friend. Taxes still are not my friend. I think you and I talked about this. I am the CPA who doesn't do her own taxes. But, I immediately kind of found this passion for audit. I loved, like my forensic accounting class. Those where you could really dig into those higher risk items, do some investigations. So that was always a passion of mine. Like a lot of us that maybe started down that accounting undergraduate, graduate level track, I got recruited by one of the big four accounting firms. So I started in external audit. And I think what I learned very quickly in external audit is that early on in my career, I wanted a home base. I wanted to make a difference within one organization. So I switched quickly to internal audit because I saw the opportunity there to really add value one place. And I think it clicked for me that my brain worked more operationally than it did financially. And so doing financial statement audits just wasn't my passion. So that's kind of how I got to internal audit really quickly in my career. I mean, that was 2005. So, 17 years ago. And, I was at the same company for 10 years and I always laugh. I tell people, you know what? I think my mentality kind of reversed. About 4 years ago, I said, hey, I don't want to just help one organization. I want to help lots of them. So, I think after I got an internal audit department, I was the director of internal audit when I left, I thought, I want to make an impact other places. So that's where total quality auditing came from. I thought about what have I been teaching my whole internal audit career and how can I spread that across the globe, really? So I started, put together a presentation first, honestly, and then decided, hey, this presentation that I've been doing for IIA chapters and other associations and companies, I should put this in a book. So that's kind of the development of where TQA happened. It kind of started as a mentality I used, then it went to a training program, then it went into kind of the book and the workbook format. So that was in 2019. So 3 years ago.
That's awesome. You've been busy. So I don't know if everyone I don't know that it's intuitive how what you do as an internal auditor, what I do as an internal auditor and some clients is what the bridge is between cybersecurity and the audit universe. Because I think when a lot of folks think about cybersecurity, they tend to think penetration testing, or they think, monitoring, intrusion detection, response, being part of a security operations center or something like that. But I know a whole lot of people who are in security cut their teeth or still do assessments as part of their job. That's like the biggest part. So you look at the whole compliance space, anybody with a GRC title, or even anyone doing security program assessments, and then as a result, producing a report and recommendations on what they should do. And in fact, internal audit departments for big companies, like they'll have IT auditors or something like that as part of their internal audit department.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways I spend a lot of my time and a lot of our team spends our time are doing what is effectively an internal audit for organizations. The subject matter just happens to be information security or cybersecurity.
Right.
So I have a few scenarios that we kind of talked about, and I want to run by you and get your thoughts and how you would approach it from a quality audit perspective. And the first one is around like risk-based auditing.
Mm-hmm.
So in the context of cybersecurity, there's a million things you can look at. And you could say the same for anything like operational audits or financial audits. But sometimes what you can either go a mile wide and an inch deep, or you can go really deep on something. But when it comes to doing a project itself, or even selecting projects and thinking about risk, like what have you learned on that topic? Like how does risk play into this? How am I selecting audits? How am I diving in certain areas in the audit plan? Can you expand on that?
Sure. So total quality auditing has 6 points of focus. And the third one is all about gathering feedback, because total quality auditing started from total quality management. And I know you and I have talked about this a little bit. There are solid principles that companies have built to be successful. And those TQM principles are what I think we all should be, whether you're in cyber, whether you're in general, internal audit, operational, financial, external auditors. We should be looking at those principles to say, how can this help us be successful? Because it's proven that these concepts work. Well, one of them is that the customer is number one. And so I think for us as any type of professional, you need to get that feedback on what is everybody worried about? What are your customers worried about? So, when you're looking at this daunting cybersecurity world or this daunting company in general and saying, how am I going to get, I'm going to put this in air quotes, coverage on all of this. You know what? Coverage is a word I wish we could throw out of our playbook as auditors, because what we need to do is really look at the important stuff. And I think the way we do that is by gathering feedback. Now that can be, I talk about using surveys, it's talking to your customers, talking to the stakeholders of your organization. Where are those risks and where do we need to focus our time and attention? To me, that's the best way to get at a risk-based approach to anything, is really using your customers to scope what you're doing. And I think that's number one to me.
Absolutely. There's like this temptation, and I think in beyond cybersecurity, but especially in cybersecurity, where the way you approach an assessment is you choose a framework.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's alphabet soup of different frameworks, and then you execute against that. Yeah, COBIT, ISO 27001, SOC 2, whatever it might be. Whereas what I've seen be effective, but haven't articulated, is exactly what you're saying is you go into a really big organization. And one of the things I preach on the security side is security has to be aligned to the business objectives. Mm-hmm. So what are those business objectives? Maybe it's to sell into additional clients. Maybe it's risk management. Maybe you're a huge target for nation states. But the way you understand those business objectives that informs how you build a security program is asking.
Yes.
So as an internal audit, how would you do that? Were you literally did you have ongoing relationships with executives? You mentioned you're sending out surveys. What are some of the techniques you would use to gather that feedback?
Surveys are number one. And what I say is, I talk a lot about risks, and I talk about how can we see around the corner of the risks coming. And one of it's a book, I'm quoting a book, Seeing Around Corners is by Rita McGrath. But what she says is you need to get from the corner, the street corner, to the corner office. It's not just about talking to executives. It's about talking to those people on the front line who know what's happening. And I think, in my personal opinion, what's worked for me in my career, surveys are the best tool. And, you mentioned I'm a higher ed professor. I taught intro to business. And I loved talking about the evolution of business models throughout the decades. And, real quick, production was the first model. Decades ago, we started by just producing whatever it is. Then we went to sales. Hey, we have to sell what we're producing. Then we went to marketing and advertising, kind of third generation. Well, we can't just produce it and hire these salespeople. We got to advertise and market for it. Well, right now we're in the fourth generation, which is literally CRM, customer relationship management. Those things matter. And the one way every company out there today is surveying us. right? We go to shop somewhere, we get a survey in our inbox. Why? Because they know our opinion matters. And so again, that's why I say surveys, yes, some organizations use them too much. They're not using them very well. But when effectively used, you can gather all the data you need from the street corner to the corner office. And that really, I mean, I've gotten pieces of gold by surveying literally every employee at an organization. I mean, I have built audit plans off of those survey responses and found the risks. And I think I love that you used one of my favorite quotes, just ask. Internal auditors need to figure out however the best way is to just ask.
I worked for, before starting Risk 360, I did some consulting work for a couple internal audit groups where they outsource their IT audit function. And we still do that to this day, where we come in and they outsource that function to us. But, you know, the big lift every year is trying to figure out what you're going to cover and what projects am I going to select. And there's kind of, what I've noticed is there's two primary ways that happens. One way is either the board of directors or the chief audit executive or someone has been presented a list. Either that's like a trends list from one of the big four accounting firms, or the board of directors has some ideas. And some of those projects need to hit the list because they're just kind of like hot topics. For example, this over the last few years, ransomware has been popular, which is legitimate. It's a big problem. So that hit the list. And then the other way that I've seen getting good projects was just keeping your ear to the ground. Like talking to a lot of people, asking them how they're going to be spending their time the next year, what big projects they have in flight, what are they worried about. And to your point, I never did that from a security perspective. I was never asking like, what are you worried about with security? It was just like, what are you working on? And people are always working on big implementations, big new customers, integrations, new engineering efforts. And those were always great opportunities for me to bring that project back and say, hey, should we be looking at this from a security perspective? So maybe there's some huge ERP integration that's going to, no one's thinking about that from a security perspective. They're thinking about that from the financials and the data accuracy perspective, but we were able to put a security overlay. But you could say that about outside of internal audit. You could say that about anything. If you just keep your ear to ground, understand what the business is doing, help you collect some really great projects.
Yeah. I mean, I say, there is absolutely one of the main TQM principles is that, W. Edwards Deming, who founded it, he would go into a business and he would say, let's throw out the inspection department. Why? Because he thought that was too late. He says it was too late, it was ineffective, and it was costly. That's an audit department a lot of times. They'll do a big system development project. We'll come in a year after it's done and audit it. And that to me is after the fact auditing that's pretty meaningless nowadays. What you're talking about, what I'm talking about teaching is, yes, we're finding out about these system development projects by asking on things like surveys, what are you doing? And then we can start going in, we can put controls in place along the way. I am tired of seeing audit plans with things that have already happened. It needs to be a change in implementation monitoring for XYZ system development project that's on our plan, because that's real time. That's what we need to be doing. That's how we're going to add value.
There's this buzzword in security, or two buzzwords really. There's one that you'll hear that's emerging, that's shift left. They keep talking about shifting left. So get security involved early in the planning and all throughout the process. You hear that in internal audit too, like get us involved early so we can start thinking about risks.
Yes.
And then there's the second concept is security or privacy by design, which is basically the same thing. Whereas you get in the planning phase before the stuff is shipped, start thinking about risk principles, quality, asking hard questions. That way they can build it right from the start instead of like as a tack on later where you're just uncovering the risk. And it sounds like that's a principle of total quality auditing ultimately.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a TQM principle, right? I mean, all these successful auto manufacturers, their old model was to get a car off the line as soon as possible. But then they had billions of dollars of defects in cars being returned. So, it was, okay, let's start controlling the processes. Let's think about continuous improvement. All of these are things we're talking about as a profession. We just didn't realize we were implementing TQM principles. And so I've just kind of really connected the dots there.
So I'm going to list the 6 just for those out there that want to read the book, Total Quality Auditing. It's ethics. That's number 1. Number 2 is standards and conduct. Number 3 is feedback, we just talked about. Number 4 is lean and agile tools. Number 5 is balancing assurance and consulting ultimately. And 6 is leadership. So I want to talk about 5
Yeah.
because which is the balancing assurance and consulting.
Mm-hmm.
So many companies, the function of an assessment or an internal audit is to go to leadership, and it's supposed to have some independence in terms of the board says, all right, an independent party looked at this, so I can trust it. I know it has accurate data in it. But if you go to any internal audit function, or even when we're doing security assessments, there's a desire to be somewhat consultative because you don't want to be adversarial. You're trying to add real value, provide some recommendations, that kind of thing. What do you think the right balance is? Like, what does total quality auditing say?
Yeah. So one of my favorite things I heard Richard Chambers say recently, he's the past CEO of the IIA, the Institute of Internal Auditors. He said, would you rather help your organization or not have an organization to help? And he was talking about that as someone was questioning, kind of bringing up this idea of independence. We can't help our organization. We cannot assist or advise on this project because they're so worried about independence. And I thought really that statement was pretty darn brilliant because, our organizations are struggling right now. A lot of them are. And so, really it's a matter of why can't you be professional, be objective, be independent, and still switch hats, which I think is something a lot of internal auditors overthink. Our internal audit definition, the definition is assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organization's operations. And I really think we cannot just do that with assurance work. It's after the fact. It's not during the process. It's coming in after things have already happened. The consulting is our real opportunity. And it's part of what this profession was set up to do. So honestly, in my personal opinion, it's way overthought in a lot of traditional audit shops still today.
This probably isn't by accident, but I will point out that the first, at least 2, ethics, number 1, standards of conduct, number 2, and then balance of assurance consulting is number 5. So I think you always got to keep ethics and, standard of conduct number 1. And that's whether you're a consultant or an auditor. But for us, like if you're clearly need to be independent for some reason, you should do that. But in almost all situations, there is a place for you to be like, especially as an auditor, because you have the opportunity. You're one of the few roles that has seen the whole company probably, and also audit it in detail. So like sometimes you can say, this is what I saw at this other company, or this is what your colleagues in the other department are doing, and it's working really well for them.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're just the catalyst for information sharing when there's not an otherwise function. There's huge value on the table there when it comes to auditing.
Absolutely. One of my favorite Deming quotes from TQM is, the greatest waste is the failure to use the abilities of people. And that's what a lot of organizations do. And sadly, we don't use our internal audit functions enough. We don't use, them as a collaborator, as a resource amongst the organization. And I'd really like to see that change.
Absolutely. Another thing that caught my eye, maybe you can give us some definitions on this, is you mentioned that there are 3 auditor types. There's ethical, gritty, and respected. And gritty caught my eye, of course. And like, what is that all about? So
yeah,
can you talk a little bit about those? What are they? What are the auditor types?
Sure. So ethical is probably pretty obvious to everybody, right? We need to have the utmost integrity, and especially in our profession, because I think, we've got to walk the talk. Everybody does, but I think personal ethics are really important in our profession. The gritty auditor. So I'm a book reader. You can tell from my background here. I have a CPE book club, literally, where I read books, give a presentation, and then give out CPEs for it. So it's my favorite thing. The book by Angela Duckworth, Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. Very popular book. She's got a great TED Talk. Really, again, everything I read, I equate to what I do for a living, right? So audit. You have to have the passion for being an auditor, or you're not going to be any good at it. And that goes for everything, right? You've just got to have a passion for it. But I definitely think the perseverance side is really important. And those 2 things equal grit. Perseverance, we have challenging clients. We are working with top executives a lot of times. What entry-level person can say they go and interview a VP? We have this amazing opportunity to influence our organization, but it takes some grit. It takes that courage, because a lot of times you're speaking with people who have been in your organization, your industry for 30 years longer than you have been. And so that word just really resonated with me. In fact, one of my very first presentations years ago when I went out on my own was auditing with grit. I wrote an article about it. It was published in the Internal Audit magazine.
Like that.
It was one of my favorite things because they go hand in hand. You've got to have one if you want to do the other.
I think a lot of folks that listen to this podcast are people kind of either trying to get into security or early in their career. And I tell folks all the time, internal auditing or doing security assessments, which is another word for saying auditing, is, I think, one of the best places to possibly launch your career. Because to your point, where else do you, one, get to see hundreds potentially of different clients over a course of a couple of years? So rapid succession, you're seeing clients. Some of them are incredibly mature. Some of them are immature. So you can compare and contrast the types of environments. You get the exposure to executives. So you start hearing what's on their mind. So it's just like a rapid education over the course of a couple of years, which is why like the big four accounting firms and some of those are so popular, because if you come in as a financial auditor or an IT auditor, you just get incredible exposure really early in your career that makes you a really good consultant or practitioner or operational person later in your career, because you have that, all of those things you can pull from as experiences. So definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I actually heard recently, I wish I could credit where I heard it from, we should stop using best practices. We need to start saying better practices, because we're all continuously, best practices means we've found the end, like the end is there and we know it, right? So, I think to your point, these opportunities are opportunities for us to all build our better practices bucket, because that's what we get to do. We get to see so much. So
absolutely. So Risk 360, we are in the business largely of doing assessment work and then presenting reports to our clients, and then ultimately helping them execute on reports and remediate their environment. So we'll come in and do a security assessment, and we'll say, here's all the stuff bad that we found that you need to fix, and here's some recommendations on how to fix them, and often we'll help them fix it, or we're issuing a certification. And I've found that writing a report is more than just a template, because we have great templates, but there's like some art into writing findings based on the audience where they can receive them and go act on them. There's tons of dynamics in terms of some people are really defensive, like they feel like their job's on the line and you're accusing them of falling down the job. Some people are really receptive to those findings. And you have to be a writer. I've written, I bet in my career, 1 million pages. Like, I don't even know, just tons of writing. And those are things that are surprising to people, I think, especially in security, is like the volume of writing, the thinking that you have to do to present a report. And that includes pen testing, by the way, for y'all listening. If you're a penetration tester, half of your job is going to be behind the screen trying to figure out how to break into a system. The other half is going to be figuring out how to articulate what you did on paper. And those are some of the most complex reports. So I stage all of that to say, one of your areas of expertise is thinking about like how to articulate findings so they're received, and total quality auditing. So can you just talk about that? I don't even know where to start, but how do we think about that?
Well, I want everybody to step back and think about the fact that while your report is important, that is just the delivery mechanism. What is more important is the content within that. And, I kind of cringe every time an auditor says that, well, my product that I'm selling, quote, is my report. No, it's not. It's the information you're communicating within that report. It's the difference that you can make across the organization by the content of that report. And so, I just like to differentiate that first, because that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I think for me, the TQA point of focus that hits this the most is lean. And that's point of focus number 4. And my biggest thing is there is so much waste we can eliminate in what we do. And a lot of that, sadly, is the time we spend on these reports. And, I'd say just look at it from that waste perspective. Like, is it going through too many levels of review? Is the content, like you said, not relevant to your readers? One of the TQM principles that I built this concept based on was essentially that you can have the most beautiful product in the world, but if it's not what your customer wants, it's meaningless. And I want auditors and, security professionals think about that product and what your customer needs, what they want, because they're going to kind of put it in their drawer and not even read it if it's meaningless to them. So it's really putting yourself in the shoes of your customer and saying, is this exactly what they need at this moment in time? I call it just-in-time auditing too. But I mean, regardless, I know I kind of went in 3 different ways here. We just really need to think of, number one, our product as the actual info in it and not as much spending as much time on how we get it there. And then, eliminate the waste you can through that reporting process. Good. Huge, huge place.
As a consultant, I think it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking like, I need this thing to be beefy, like in terms of length, pretty, all the things, because this is your deliverable, and that's kind of what you're getting paid for sometimes. So there's like this desire to make people feel like this is what I paid for. But if I think about it, there are any successful client I've ever had, we didn't spend a lot of time reviewing the report. What we spent time was meetings before the meeting, like consulting all the way up into the report where we're talking about how to resolve it. So by the time they get the report, like there's already projects in flight to fix issues. It's been well circulated. Everybody pretty much knows what's in the report. So then they get it and they're like, great, that's a formality at this point.
Right. That's agile, right? That's really having those meetings with your clients and your customers throughout the process so they know exactly where you're at and what the problems you're finding real time are and fixing them. I think that to me is the importance of agile auditing. And, then like you said, by the time you get to the report, it's just a checkbox and it's done. And it's not this like massive, 6 weeks to get the report out process, which is what I dread in a lot of internal audit.
Yes. And what else is coming to mind here to me? I agree, that's the best way to do it. But sometimes I've seen in audit departments or when you're issuing a report, there's so much coaching to CYA, cover your butt in that report. So you got to document everything. And because they're like, look, everyone's going to push back on every single finding. But what I'm realizing is to be agile, you have to really solve another root cause, which is trust. Like your organization has to trust you. You have to have a good reputation. They have to be assuming positive intent. They have to know that you're not a gotcha auditor, that you're there to help them. And if all of those things are taken care of, they're not so much worried about the words in the final report. They're worried about getting the job done and all the things that come with that. So is that your experience too? I see you nodding. Like, how do you build trust and like earn the opportunity to do an agile audit?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it is making sure you're building that rapport that here's what I say. Stop catching the problem, right? Start coaching to fix the problem. Internal auditors, stop, being the gotcha auditor, like you said, stop being the bad cop, start being the crossing guard. You are getting them from point A to point B. And, you've got to show them this to earn it, right? And you can't it's not going to happen overnight. The respected auditor is the third one. It's the ethical auditor, the gritty auditor, and the respected auditor. And that's a lot of what I talk about. How are you showing them you're solving the problems? You're not just finding them. And that does go back to the report, by the way. I have seen so many audit reports that all they do is list the findings. And yes, maybe they have a recommendation that says, think about a new system to fix this. Think about, XYZ. Think about it. But it doesn't take that next step and really think through how could they really solve this problem? How could we even assist with that? Show in the report that they're already down the path of doing that. It's like we stopped too short a lot of times is what I see. It's just like, let's just throw all the findings in the report and feel good about ourselves. And that's not the auditors that are going to earn the respect and have that trust and that rapport like you're talking about. And so it's about the actions. You've got to show them that you're more than just that find the problem auditor.
So in a lot of companies, not all, but many companies, there's a board of directors and then there's an audit subcommittee at the board of directors. And the audit executives, the chief audit executive is ultimately choosing audit projects and then funneling the report results up to that audit committee who are reading them and then trying to steer the ship. Like how's the company doing based on these audit reports I get? And the two types of board cultures that I've seen, one is that there seems to be a reward mechanism for bad reports in that that proves that the audit team's really, auditing hard and finding good stuff and making lots of improvements. And then there's the other kind of board culture that rewards progress, collaboration, not throwing anybody under the bus. They want to see results. Again, they're assuming positive intent. And I've been part of audit committee meetings, but never selecting a board myself. So I don't know what drives one culture versus another. But what have you seen work in terms of if you have that board of directors culture that is maybe pushing inadvertently an audit client to be more adversarial in nature?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen anything work to kind of help change that culture or give them a different perspective?
It takes a lot of talking, a lot of teaching, a lot of, I would say not just auditors are stuck in this traditional mentality, but a lot of management is and a lot of boards are. So you hit the nail on the head right there. And here's one of my favorite things to say is that every good internal auditor, any good internal audit leader is doing their best to work themselves out of a job. Meaning we are here to make the company so good that they don't need us anymore at the end of the day. And I think just if every chief audit executive could go into audit committee with that mentality of, look, we're doing our job if we aren't finding problems. I want you to shift your mentality from thinking that we're not doing our jobs if all of these reports don't have findings. Because what that should mean instead to you is that we're doing the pre-work. We're doing the preventative work. We're involved in projects where we need to be, that we're not having these after the fact findings anymore. Number one mindset as auditors, we have to be more proactive than reactive. And we've traditionally been reactive. And it's about shifting management's mindset to that. It's about shifting the board's mindset to that too. So, keep talking about it. That's my only advice is the luck that I've had over my career is to just keep reiterating it, right? Mm-hmm. That's key. And then you got to show it in your actions. Put in your audit reports where you have put in some excellent controls within a new system development project. I mean, show that proactive, it's not a finding, but it's a win. Shift that mentality from reports just being all bad and all negative and all findings. Give yourself credit. I think that's a problem in a lot of audit shops. They do this consulting work. They don't know how to report on it. I'm all about do a memo, show what you're doing, take credit, because that's how you're going to earn the respect and get that trust of management. And that's how you're going to shift that mindset.
I have there's a guy I'd probably call somewhat of a mentor that I worked with early in my career. I wish I could name the company, but Bart, if you're listening, he knows who he is. And one of the things, it was one of my first jobs after consulting, when I was one of my first jobs after public accounting, when I was doing independent consulting, and he was helping me think through how to write audit reports. And it was very different from anywhere else I'd ever written an audit report, because what he did is every audit report was 2 pages. That was like his goal. Like there was exceptions to that, but that was kind of his rule. Mm-hmm. And so that required brevity and being agile and things like that. And the first part of the report was always 2 things. One was you had to talk about how the project you work on exhibited the company's core values. Okay. There was like a brag section where you had to kind of integrate that. And 2 is you had to talk about something good that they did. Like, hey, what are some of the positive aspects that we noticed during the audit, even if it was just their attitude. Like their whole process was broken, but their attitude was great. Which I thought was a really good way to start the report, because what it did is it made me think about that, which is good. It also disarmed the reader a little bit and let them know we're on their side. And then the rest of the report was pretty brief, and it often included good stuff as well as some of the findings. Mm-hmm. And I think it took me a while to really appreciate what he was trying to accomplish with some of those principles and just building them in. But he's one of the best internal auditors and vice presidents or chief audit executives I've seen in terms of the real change he's been able to make at an organization, not just producing reports. Mm-hmm. So I left that one and then went to another organization doing some consulting work. And they had the opposite, whereas their audit reports were lengthy, very negative, terrible relationship with IT in terms of just some fear. Like no one was trying to be bad, but it was like just a lot of fear because every audit report went out was damning, that kind of thing. And one of the ways that I drove a little bit of organizational change as a consultant even is that the first report I ever wrote, I actually produced 2 copies of the report. I had one in their format, and then I did one in the format of which I was coached to by Bart. And he didn't accept the short version because the board was used to seeing something. But what we ended up talking about was, why don't you submit both to the board, and like just communicate to them, our audit reports have been historically negative, but there's a lot of good stuff that you're probably not getting from them. So here's another format. And they ended up actually going with a hybrid format from then forward. They were like, they super well received, and they had never even thought about doing that. I was surprised by it.
Right.
But to this day, they still have that hybrid report format where it starts off positive. It talks about core values, talks about wins in the project, and it goes into some depth about some of the findings. But if you're an auditor and you feel like you have no way to drive organizational change at the board level or anything like that, maybe try that. Maybe just produce 2 versions or start putting some positive stuff up front. Because if you're a board member, I think you want that. Like, you want that visibility too, that things are going well and how's it positive. You don't want just all the bad stuff. So just a little tip out there that might work.
Yeah, no, that reminded me of that joke, why did the internal auditor or the auditor cross the road, right? Because that's what they did last year. That's what last year's paper said to do. Unfortunately, I think that's a blind spot that a lot of auditors have, is that's the way we've always done it. I teach about avoiding blind spots to our ethics, but I think there's blind spots all over our lives. And, one of them is that's how we've always done it. So stop.
That's the favorite saying of any auditor for sure.
Yes, it is.
Cool. So you wrote the book, Total Quality Auditing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always fascinated with anyone who writes a book. It's like something that like I always say that I'm going to do. Like, I want to buy a cabin in North Georgia where I live and, sit there and drink coffee and wax poetic in a book. But I can never find the time or discipline to put enough words on paper to write one. So can you talk about that? Like, how did you get the book done? What inspired you to do it? Did you wake up at 7 a.m. every morning and write for an hour? How did that go?
Well, so I think I kind of alluded to this already. Everybody and you've said this, you've written more in your life than you ever thought you would possibly write. And we all do that. We all write. And I think it's a matter of just kind of getting out of your own head about the fact that this is a book. It's not that different. I had put together an 8-hour presentation on TQA, and I started doing it. That was like 225 slides. And I know that sounds like a lot. They were fun slides, I promise. My presentations are fun. But, now this is 100 and some page book, right? I mean, it's like 148 pages. That's less than 225 slides. It is less daunting than you think. And I think it's just a matter of sitting down and just like when you're in school, structure it. The best part about TQA is that it's 6 points of focus. 6 isn't daunting. There's 14 TQM principles, by the way. So I took that down to 6. 14's too many.
Thank you.
Yeah, right? So, but 6 chapters, essentially, then, besides an intro and a conclusion, and you just write about, ethics to me is the easiest one. I basically live and breathe ethics, and I have a second ethics book that kind of spawned from this one. But, how do we audit culture and ethics as auditors? What have I done in the past? What are some stories of organizations that we can use in hindsight as examples of what not to do? These are things we talk about, and often we write about them. We post on LinkedIn about it. You guys have a record of your thoughts. It's just a matter of putting them into one place.
Yep. Maybe I'm a nerd here, but I really like this concept because to me, it's not auditing. We're talking about risk identification ultimately, and that could be cross disciplines and in life. You're thinking about communication, you're thinking about empathy. And there's so much to be learned when you're thinking about a quality system that you can apply to many different disciplines. One of the things you said too, that you do, that I want to plug on your behalf, is you mentioned that you have like a webinar series that's remote. It's an hour a month.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? What are you doing there?
Yeah. So Total Quality Auditing, literally, this will be the 4th year that I'm doing this. So this is pre-pandemic that I've been doing webinars, 1 a month, 1 hour a month. This year in 2022, they happen to be the 3rd Tuesday of every month. I'm in Colorado, so they're at 11 o'clock Mountain Time, my time. So that'd be 1 p.m. on the East Coast. But I break TQA, those 6 points of focus, into 12 parts over the year. So January, all you've missed is kind of the intro. Where did it come from? If you're listening to this right now, you've gotten a little bit of that. It came from TQM principles. We actually go through those 14 principles. But I always send the replays. So if you miss one of the 12, you can always watch it. So that still applies if anybody still wants to join the series. And I have more attendees on registrants on this year than any other year. And I am thrilled that it's kind of caught fire. And this is a new way to look at internal audit. And I can tell that people need it because of those reach outs that I'm getting, because of conversations like this with you. We all want to have a new mindset, and it's just, they don't have the tools to do it. And that's where I feel like I come in. I've got the workbook we work through. I send every participant a book and a workbook, hard copy. I mean, this is about education. This is about having a resource for years to come. So I just want it to be valuable for everybody. I give you homework. It's not hard, but you don't have to do it. I'm not that kind of teacher, but it's just, it's a fun, different way to get 12 CPE in the year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Who's usually your attendees? Is it typically internal audit departments that attend?
Yep. Typically, I've got some big name internal audit departments. I probably drop the names. But this year I'm super excited about.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and tell folks, if you're in security and you're doing security assessments, this kind of content totally makes sense, because you're not talking about financial auditing. You're just talking about how to do a quality audit, which if you're doing assessments, you need. Where can people find it? Do you have a website or something people can go check out?
Yes. So totalqualityauditing.com will take you straight to the page, and it will tell you all about each of the 12. You can register for one of the 12, or you can do the whole series still. And like I said, get the replays for the ones you've missed. But like you said, what I love about TQA is that I have people in compliance on there, right? I have IT auditors on there. I have government auditors. I have, performance auditors, quality assurance auditors, and just typical internal auditors. But it really does. I have just risk professionals on there. It is, like you said, it is just thinking about, how can I start talking about the culture within my organization? What do those standards of conduct look like within my organization, within my function? It's very, I want to say general, but it's, obviously we get into a lot of specifics of what we do, but it crosses everybody, and you would get something out of it.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, Jo, thank you so much for connecting. If you guys want to connect with Jo, you can check out the website she just mentioned. The way I connected with Jo is looking up Amanda Jo Irvin on LinkedIn, and you have a podcast too that they should check out. And this is awesome content. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us a little education here.
Sure. Thanks for having me again.
Hey, thank you for watching Tuesday Morning Grind podcast. If you like content just like this from cybersecurity executives, thought leaders, hackers, then come on over to risk360.com. Check out our resource center where we have blog posts, white papers, videos, all for free that can teach you about cybersecurity. If you want to know more about cybersecurity certifications like ISO 27001, SOC 2, PCI, HITRUST, and others, we have a ton of content on that. So whatever you're looking for, we have a lot of resources. Head on over to risk360.com, shoot us a note, and we look forward to keeping the conversation going.